Recording. I'm Jeff. I have Luke, Job, and a newcomer to the Randos channel, kind of, Paul. But this will be a dual release. This will be on your channel, Paul, and this will also be on the Randos United channel. And this is a reunion of sorts. I can't remember exactly how long ago it was, but the very first video that's on the Randos United channel is the four of us together. And that was the first time that we tried the experiment of some randos from Paul's audience, if you will, or his subscribers or his regular watchers, and sometimes regular guests. And in the case of one of us, a many-time guest. We had the experiment to all come together and talk to Paul at the same time a little while ago. So this is a bit of a reunion. One of the things that I would like to throw in here before I forget, because I know our conversation can get going pretty quickly, is Paul, whether we can talk about it in this conversation or I can just make a request that you talk about it at some point, is you've had Jeff Quackenbush on your channel a couple of times now.
Yeah.
And he's posed a challenge that I feel like hasn't really been addressed, and it has to do with the ethic that reflects what we call the Christian ethic. It comes out of the Eastern traditions, China, the various cultures from that part of the world. And so I'd like to talk about that a little bit because I have some C.S. Lewis evidence that kind of weighs in Jeff Quackenbush's favor. Surprise, I have some C.S. Lewis quotes, but I'll just leave it at that, and that's a bit of my introduction, and also a hope that we can either talk about here or that you can address it at some point, Paul. So I'll shut up for now.
And he shuts up, and we have nothing. So
No,
I don't think anyone should shut up.
Hang on. What's the statement that the Christian ethic has its origins in the East?
Well, I think in your second conversation, maybe, Paul, with Jeff, he said, he basically said, no, this thing that we're calling Christian, it existed long before 2,000 years ago, and it also existed in the Eastern part of the world. And I'll tell you what, it's not Christian. It's a very big assertion, but I've had a difficult time as I've thought about it, thinking, well, wait a second, this did exist. Now, from a Christian perspective and a Judeo-Christian perspective, one could say, well, yeah, God has been there the whole time. So it's no surprise that this would exist before the historical person Christ ever landed on the planet. But that was argued, I think, pretty well by Matt Dillahunty against that point, that just says, well, then you can always say that, right? You can make that assertion and you don't have to have the proof. And so
hang on a second here. What are we talking about exactly? I still don't know what exactly is that. Like, what does he mean by Christian ethic?
Paul, can you explain this a little bit better?
I think he's arguing that the ethic of love, the primacy of love, is something that was not unknown to the East. Now, my difficulty is that's a lot of stuff to study in depth. My initial thought is the dominant Eastern metaphysic, which is of chaos. If you get it from Kansas, the old rock band, all we are is dust in the wind. It's hard to build an ethic of love on that. But there is a lot of philosophy and religious thinking in the East that I am completely oblivious to. And so I'm reluctant to weigh in without having done some research. But that level of research, I don't think is high enough on my salience landscape.
I have thoughts.
Oh, go.
Okay, so you could say, let's say Buddhism, it's older in that sense, and its own roots in Hinduism are even older than that. You could say the idea in there of metta, of loving kindness, of having a certain attitude towards the other person who is also part of that one that you are a part of, is pre-existing Christianity. But that is not absolutely not comparable to the Christian idea of not only is there a God that's a personal God standing outside space and time that I have a personal relationship with, that God loves me, that God loves the other, I love God, and therefore I must love the other. There's sort of a small trinity in there of a triangle relationship that I don't think that's existed before Christianity. Jews especially wouldn't have liked it. If you said that, they'd probably get you killed. And so unless there were, I'm overlooking older religions than Christianity, I don't think that particular embodiment of love, the way that the creator God in which everything exists and through which everything exists also is primary existence and love and goodness. You could tell it to a Buddhist, they'd look at you like you were nuts. Or a Hindu.
Well,
because go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to throw in there. I don't think that that's the point that Jeff Hugh is arguing against. I think he would say that
I burned the wrong straw man.
Well, no, I think it's a perfectly legitimate point. I still don't think I don't think it uproots the argument that he was making, because he might concede and say, yeah, that's fine. That might have been where it first appeared, and with the Hebrews, and later on reinforced with Jesus. But the actual ethics themselves of love for another and care for another doesn't need, and there's evidence that it doesn't need that understanding of reality to even be present for this deeper ethic or for this other ethic to exist. And his point again would be, that's not Christian, because it predates all of that. I don't even need to
human
in a God to be able to think that is an important way to approach life and approach reality and approach life.
No. But you could reduce this all the way to say we're social species, and therefore we need to love the other. Yeah, but I'm sure as hell not gonna love that asshole. And Christianity says, no, you should probably also love him, even though, yeah, he's kind of a dick.
So this, I don't know what's, so there's, I don't know, I have a lot of thoughts. I don't know if I can bring them all out. So there was, Kale had posted on the Discord a while back this lecture on the differences between monism, dualism, and Trinitarianism on the Discord from Ellis Potter, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Which was really good. And this is where I'll get up on my soapbox again. But this gets into the differences between what you use the word embodied, and I would say this is what I try to argue when I talk with Sam about why I'm probably intellectually Trinitarian, is I think everyone acts Trinitarian, because I think it's the nature of being. And I don't think you can get away with it if you're being. And so, and I think that, well, this gets into what I keep trying to goad Paul into doing, is doing some sort of series on Revelation, because I think this gets into what revelation is and the different kinds of revelation, and what the revelation of the Christ, Jesus, was and is, and what that did and what it accomplished.
Are you saying the book of Revelation, or Revelation as a concept?
The revelation of the incarnation, the revelation of God, the unveiling of Jesus in the incarnation. Because, I mean, my understanding of the New Testament is that's what this is Rene Girard, like things hidden since the foundation of the world. This was the unveiling and the revelation in a way that was previously not comprehended, at least propositionally, conceptually, maybe by the Eastern religions or by Jews or anything. But I would say that we knew, that humanity knew in an embodied way, because people love their kids. Ellis Potter talked about that in his lectures. He says I believe within Buddhism, he says it's this monistic religion, and so he says really all love is actually what the cause of suffering. It's we need, everything is illusion, like illusory and an illusion, and so even loving your child is actually a sin on that framework, because it leads to suffering. But people do. They act as if, therefore they're Trinitarian.
Listen, I haven't listened to the whole video yet. I started it, and I'm too ADHD, but I will finish it, I'm sure, after this prompting.
Also, we dove right into the philosophy deep end, didn't we?
We did.
Sorry.
We did. It was all Jeff. To this Jeff, it was Jeff P and Jeff Q.
Yeah, and then this is the other thing I would say about Jeff Q's thing, and this is something that Peugeot says, is like it kind of gets into the modernist evidentialist way of talking about these things, and getting evidence and proving it. Is people will be like, well, there are all these dying and resurrecting figures that predate Christ. I'm just like, so what? I don't care. That doesn't do anything to invalidate the truth of Jesus.
Well, that, it gets into your question about revelation, what revelation is, what do we mean by that term, especially what do, I'll just pick on Sam Harris because he's so patently pickable. The idea so often that atheist apologists promote is that revelation is new information out of the blue, which is a fair argument, because that is definitely one aspect of revelation. But for each of us, the way we use the word, we would say, that's a revelation to me. That's a new idea, but is it a completely new idea? It's probably, our grasp on the distinctions of our ideas pretty thin. We flow between them all the time, and we forget. And
sorry.
Go ahead, Joe.
New mathematical theorems, by that way, are revelations.
Yeah, exactly. The world is full of it. And so what exactly are they arguing? Well, and in all fairness, they might turn the table and say, what do Christians mean with revelation? And even going back to good old Reformed catechism, there's general and special revelation. What's general? General is just about everything around us. What is special? Special always comes wrapped in general. We see it with our same eyes. We hear it with our same ears. We feel it with our same feelings. It's, when Jesus came in, he didn't have the artists later put the halo on him. He comes incognito. And the point that I've made many times, Jesus, we would imagine, would have been the greatest preacher in the history of the world. And it seemed like just about everybody begged off on him, at least when the show wasn't there or when the government was pressing down on you. So what are you going to say?
So this brings, the thing I'd like to throw out in regard to revelation is I heard, so there's this Orthodox priest father. He's actually the deacon of one of the main Orthodox seminaries in America, St. Vladimir's in New York. But his name's John Behr. And he talks about, he
How do you spell
has
his last name?
Behr.
Like the paint.
Yeah. He's a billionaire. He owns Behr. I'm just kidding. He's gotten rid of all his earthly wealth. So he actually came out here, and I went
trophy husband should have a sense of humor.
Right. Yeah, that's what I get paid for. So he came out here and he did a lecture, and it's one of those. I mean, I bet you guys have these where every once in a while, I had a revelation when I heard him speak. I realized something in a way that I've never realized before. It was a transformative moment for me. And the main point of his lecture was, it was on Revelation somewhat, and he went through, and he's so great because he's very dialogical in his lectures. He just sits there and throws out questions, which is really fun. And so all these people answer, and he'll just be like, nope, 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 because they have all these pre-canned Sunday school answers, right? And he starts the lecture, and he's done this in many different forums, but he'll say, like, what was one of the most profound things about the disciples in the New Testament? And so people throw out all these answers, and he essentially says at the end is how dense they were, how slow of hearing and seeing they were. And he goes through all this. He walks you through all this, but he says a lot of people assume, and I would say kind of these modernist Christians assume, and evidentialists, like, oh, if I was alive 2,000 years ago, I would have seen Jesus, and I would have just been like, oh, there he is, the Son of God. No, you wouldn't. And the reason we know, no, you wouldn't, is that's not what happened with the disciples. Right. And so with Revelation, one of the most profound things to me, and the most profound part of his lecture was that, so Jesus lives his whole life, what you were saying, Paul, he does all these things. People leave him, they come and go all the time, and he says, like, unless you eat my body and drink my blood, you have no part in me. People are like, crazy. And they want to be fed, so they come back. And I mean, he's obviously compelling in some way, but he's also kind of scary. But then at the end, everyone leaves him.
And people think he's a jerk often. I mean, again, if you read slowly and closely the kinds of things he says, we're just, that's not what a moral person would do.
Right. And then Revelation. So how his main point, I'll try to be quick, I'm long-winded, but his main point in the Revelation is that even after the resurrection, right, there's all these sightings of Jesus, but they don't recognize him. They don't see him. Well, that's weird. That's strange. All these people that were with him all the time don't see him. He shows up in the upper room. They don't know who he is. These people who walked around with him for 3 years don't know who he is. And then John Behr's point, and I mean, this is I had never seen this in all my Bibling in church. And then all of a sudden, Jesus, he does two things. He opens the scriptures, walking through the Old Testament, saying everything that has to do with him, and then he breaks the bread, and in the opening of the scriptures and the breaking of the bread, all of a sudden, boom, their eyes are opened, there's an unveiling, there's an apocalypse, there's a revelation, and they see Christ for who he is. John Behr's point, Father Behr's point in the whole thing is that the way the disciples saw Jesus as the Christ, as the Messiah, saw him for who he is the exact same way that we do right here and now. It's no different.
I think it's a good point. It's a very Calvinist point. It's by the power of the Holy Spirit.
Right. I mean, it's Christian. It's Orthodox. I mean, he's Orthodox.
Isn't it also an order and chaos thing, though?
What do you mean?
That revelation takes chaos, or a revelation is chaos turned into order, but not gradually. So we don't, because it's continuously, we do this to the world anyway, but it's like boom, and right away there's a lot of chaos that's suddenly now habitable. It's like when I watched that first Peterson video and he told me about Cain and Abel, and suddenly it's wham, and suddenly there's Christianity everywhere, and you look at the world differently. With not that it was chaos, but maybe I didn't understand it in a different way. So I don't know if this works everywhere. Maybe it's just bullshit. I don't know.
Wittgenstein said similar things in terms of, if a lion could speak English, we wouldn't understand it. And you could use all the same English words. You're not, because the frame of reference for the lion, and I think that's true. And that's been validated with how long does it take from people from two different cultures to begin to get on the same page? That's
or even my wife and me.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Even people who've been, husband and wife for how many years? No, that's very true.
So then how does this apply to, so then my question would be, how does this apply to Jeff Q? And then his question and then a response? Because this is, I agree with all that, but then how does that not become just like somewhat of a Christian trump card in dialogues about Jesus.
Trump card?
Yeah,
Just
that's
like,
Okay, and undefeat, something you just can't defeat in argument. It's like it ultimately wins. There's no way you can beat it.
there's a
like I see
problem.
this truth because I see it.
Yeah. And there's a problem in normal human relationships with this idea of trump cards and defeaters, that and the democratic culture is simply allergic to any exclusivist claim, including Wittgenstein's. because the democratic ethos says everyone is equidistant from the same point at every time. And I understand why people like that idea, and that idea definitely is within Christianity in many ways, but it's simply not true in how many circumstances. I remember as a kid watching the Little Rascals, the R Gang comedies, and one of the tropes in there was anyone can grow up to be president. Well, it seems, increasingly in American politics, being a billionaire is super helpful. So even if you're not using your billions to, fund your campaign, but you're fundraising. So, this American vision of democracy and egalitarianism, there's some real struggle. There's a reason it's had to be promoted, because as the Greeks would have said, are all people born equal? I'm not equal to LeBron. LeBron isn't equal to me. In what essence are we trying to compare the people? And there's near limitless numbers of aspects with which we can try to compare. So Americans are just really allergic to any kind of exclusion by our culture.
So
and you get used to that.
I have a question for you, Paul. This is something I've been wondering about a long time, and I think it's profound biblically, and I think it relates, and it's a recurrent theme throughout the New Testament, but what does it mean that, and I'm thinking particularly, the book of Romans talks about this, and then another point, I can't remember, but that God does not show partiality.
I think when we hear that, I think there's two ideas. One is that there is no pit so deep that God can't suck you out of it. I think that's one. And I think the second is God does not show partiality in the ways that the Roman emperor or the world would show partiality. And, you might call me a little bit woke in this, but the Old Testament regularly talks about God's concern for the widow and the orphan and the poor and the neglected. It's, I think, the same lesson that Jesus says when he says, when you enter the room, take the lowest seat. God understands our hierarchies, and he loves to invert them. We can put them in Pageauian terms. So
yeah, I agree. How does that relate to trump card, to like revelation and knowledge and knowing the truth about Christ?
I think it's both and, in terms of, if you were raised in a Christian culture or a Christian home or with godly Christian parents, there's no question that in some ways you have an advantage to know Christ, in other ways not. And they're both true at once, because even those advantages, by virtue of our depravity, can become disadvantage, can become an immunization against the knowledge of Christ.
Whereas, that's Romans, right? Like Israel, Gentiles.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's Romans 1, 2, and 3. And so Romans 1 says, here's the Gentile world. Romans 2 said, here's the Jewish bubble. Romans 3 says, in a sense, you're all in the same mess. Now Americans want to say, is the mess equal? Well, whose mess is ever equal? They're, equal with respect to what? Equal with respect to our, there's just, we get into the habit of easy equivalences and easy imagined measurements in our culture, when, if you look more deeply at it, let's say you're a shrink and two different people walk into your office. Are are they equal? Equal in what respect? It's, there's so many respects with which to imagine, and so many variables in individual cases. Equal has to mean certain very limited qualities that we are pointing to, and even those are almost always aspirational. So that's what I would say.
So one of the ways, and I mean, if you guys have other stuff to say, but one of the ways I wanted to.
Did you doubt that Luke could fill the video?
Not at all.
I'm just giving you, there's a fire hose in here. I'm just giving a drip.
Luke has to leave in an hour and a half, so then we can talk.
Okay. We'll give Luke his time.
No, one of the things, so people ask you this, Paul, but I'm also curious, but I'll take it really practical and not leave it so broad ideological. The kind of like, what have you learned since video 1 to now? But I would say, what has it taught you about people, specifically as it relates to Christian practice and the church, particularly in the American context, because that's our context, or, well, sorry, Joe, or the Western Christian context, and in talking and relating to people, practically, what have you learned about how to interact with people, and then therefore potentially counsel you would give to either other disenfranchised religious randos or pastors who, because this is the thing, right? Pastors a lot of times are saying, like, these are the people, we want to reach all these people, but yet it's not happening well.
Yeah, just to add to that question, what things have you learned about how to best help those people from this experience?
Right.
Well, I have to say that these last 2+ years have probably been some of the most intense learning years of my life. And I've been a lifelong learner. I love to learn. In just about everything that I've done in my life, I feel like I've learned. But this has been intense and demanding just because of the volume of interactions and different people that, I've been had the privilege of sitting down with. And this meetup tour that we're doing in March, I'm thinking about that second week, that trip from Sacramento up to Vancouver, or really Fresno up through Sacramento into Vancouver and back down. That's going to be intense. That's going to be a lot of interaction. So that will be challenging, but I think it'll also be tremendously fun. I don't know how good. Boy, this stuff is so hard. I woke up this morning thinking about what it means to be a human being with respect to dreams. I had this dream that I was in some kind of weird go-kart race. And you just realize that so much of our cognition is not subject to our control or volition. So much of it. I think, I would have to say that probably my most influential teacher in terms of how to deal with other human beings was my father, because I spent years watching, and I didn't know that I was watching him, because you're just a kid and you're just absorbing. Just watching my father deal with many, many different types of people in Peterson, New Jersey, and in Whitensville, Massachusetts, and in other places. And his astounding love and generosity and openness and patience. Christians understandably are highly motivated to sort of place people, sort of mold and shape and get people to say certain things and do other things, and pastors especially. And I understand that. I, number one, have a fair amount of skepticism that their vision of what people should say and do is necessarily that godly and Christian often, because there's so much Christian BS in the world, and we see it all the time. And the fact that people like to imagine that it's nominal Christians who sort of walk away from the faith. And I love to use Bart Campolo as an example of the other, because by almost anyone's imagination, Tony Campolo is an amazing Christian man. And his son had a terrific opportunity to see him up close and to be deep within Christian ministry. And he walks away as kind of a quintessential nun, NONES. So I think, and I think one of the big things that both, and it was Vervaeke in my last conversation with him that noted, I had been noting a similarity between Peterson and Tom Holland, who's sort of been my latest, guru crush. And I just have regular guru crushes. I get sort of fixated on someone and I want to study the heck out of him. Then I move on to someone else. But, Vervaeke noted, one interesting similarity between them in that they both had an ability to recognize and articulate the performative essentiality of Christianity in the West.
Love that.
So simply a verbal profession is, and again, this is very, very Petersonian, simply a verbal profession of someone's proximity to Jesus is not necessarily our best guide. And I think this is biblical because, again, not only is God not a respecter of persons, but God looks at the heart. And then when the Bible says that, it means God can evaluate us in ways that we don't even know ourselves. So I know Job wants to get in there. So go ahead, Job. You raised your finger.
No. People were walking by and waving at me. I mean, my window facing the street. I was just waving back. I got nothing.
Job's got fans. They accumulate outside of his window.
So, Paul, I agree with everything you said, and I think that's spot on. But this, I don't know. I'm thinking back to my first conversation with you. My beef, my struggle then, and my own personal experience in the church, though, is because of things that I try to articulate. Often, pastors in America are not going to do that. They're not going to acknowledge what you just said. Yeah. They won't.
Well, there's tremendous social pressure within the church for good reason. Because we have to have these kinds of systems to have social institutions and coherence. And and that's why the propositional level is never going away. And it's really important in terms of social dynamics. But I also think that the church is insufficiently aware of, just look at what happens at used to happen at a Billy Graham crusade. You come down, you say the sinner's prayer, and they say, just as you are. Immediately, once you get in, just as you are, they're trying to change who you are. It seems like a total lie to people that I just have to say Jesus is my Lord and Savior. And I think about this when I think about, I don't want to name names, but certain theological traditions that, they say, well, this person said or did this, and therefore we don't even know ourselves. How are we judging each other to such a degree? And so I think openness is very important. But saying that, I do also want to recognize a point that I make quite often at church. I've made it sometimes on my channel, that Jesus is both more open and more demanding than we think is moral or responsible. And it's that sense in which Jesus, I mean, we're always working balance. So Paul VanderKlay is open. He's insufficiently demanding of people. And that's true. And it's not just true in terms of this area. It's true in terms of other areas of my life. And the older you get, the more you see that my strengths are almost always my weaknesses.
So I have my, I'll shut up. So how does this relate? I won't either. How you linked a long time ago. It's one of my favorite things that you have promoted outside of your own content. That Bruce Charlton article on what we've learned from modernity. And in that, it essentially says that modernity has showed us a lot of what, I mean, this gets into what I call technological babble, and even what I think Guy Sengstock was saying the other day about technological colonization, is that is inherently bound up within systems. I think that's part of the mechanistic assumption of materialism and the whole modern world. I think, how does that relate to institutions and what Bruce Charlton was saying in that article, that systems, part of what postmodernity, the postmodern critique, was that when you think of things technologically, mechanistically, systematically, what modernity has showed us is there's too much. The world is infinite. There's too much information. There's too many facts. There's too many things. So then systems become infinitely complex. Carl, don't yell at me. I understand the difference between, I mean, I don't know what you're saying. I really don't, but you're going to be mad at me. So
you know that.
Yeah, I know he'll be mad at me no matter what. So, but so then you build systems upon systems, but it seemed like the takeaway that he was saying from that article is that there are things that are fundamentally not systematic, which aren't, you could call them institutions. This is where it gets into your semantics of what you call an institution, but that would be marriage and the family. Those don't function on rules and systems. Yes, you have rules, but they're not, this is the whole, what I think the New Testament is talking about with like law and spirit is rules. You can't treat your kids based on like a tax code rule book, or it won't work. The relationship won't work. You can't do that with your spouse. And I think the church was always meant to do that. So how does that relate to the institution and the systematizing of propositions within the church, but still having that? Because this is the thing, is I would say when you try to institutionalize propositions in confessional and statement of faith frameworks, you're going to continue getting the kinds of things that I think you've been experiencing with people throughout this last 2 years, and you're not going to get deeper relationships. You're going to get increasing isolation and exclusion. That's my whole point, kind of.
My question about that is, this seems to be a relatively new thing, and the church with all this confessionalism has been around for thousands of years.
True.
You know, and so if what you said is what yields all this stuff, it seems like it would have been happening a lot sooner.
Yeah, well, this gets into, I think, somewhat, and I don't understand this with like and this is an assumption, but kind of like the Barfield evolution of consciousness. I think the way that we conceive of these things and like what has led to kind of, I mean, you see it in American politics, like the way that Christians behave in the church with unending schism and identitarianism isn't any different than what we're witnessing in the political realm right now. This is why I called, somewhat Protestantism like religious intersectionality, is because it's unending schism. And so like somehow I think I agree with you. We've had confessions forever, but I think the way that we've thought about those and related to those has evolved in the last 1,000, 1,500 years. I don't think the way that like the Nicaeans or even the Orthodox now, I don't think they think of the confessions in the same way theologically that I was raised to think of them.
Protestantism, I think, is a response to the tyrannical behavior of the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, you can
Yeah.
just see that in Luther's story. Luther begins wanting to have a conversation about a bunch of theological things, and the message he got very quickly from the Catholic Church is, shut up or we'll burn you at the stake. Luther had exactly the personality that said, that's why I always think about Martin Luther and Jordan Peterson together. It's like, well, if I'm not gonna say it.
Right. Here I stand. I can
I can do no more. You can put me in jail and I won't eat. And I believe him. That's just how the dude is.
Yeah.
So I think what happened in Protestantism was an institutional manifestation of a lot of the dynamics that have been in the church all along. And when you look at the kinds of theological disputes all throughout the Middle Ages, the church fathers, but at the same time, the only way we can have these disputes is with propositions and actions. And so I think these elements are inescapable, and hopefully over time we continue to learn, and our understanding of them gets refined and improved, perhaps. But the Orthodox churches had plenty of fights. I mean, you get into them, and they will fight over language, because it's the only way we can often create these representations. They'll fight over language. They'll fight over architecture. I've made the point before that, one of the biggest, it was long before I got here, but one of the biggest fights this church ever had was whether the carpeting on the stage should be royal blue or burgundy. And burgundy won, because burgundy is the color of the Western Church. We will fight about anything. And I think anyone who's married should understand this.
We need to do it in a way, though, where it doesn't divide, though, because that's the difference between a healthy marriage and a dysfunctional marriage. Is, yes, of course there'll be disagreement. It shouldn't divide you. And
then the question is, what does division look like? Because, for example, in the Protestant church, division is institutional, but then there's evangelicalism, where people are saying, oh, we're all Bible believing church. Oh, and then there's, then you have the problem of the one and the many. And you can always and forever say, well, everything's one. Okay. Sign over your house to me, Mr. One. Give me your car keys. You care if I sleep with your wife? I always just kind of think, I understand seeing oneness, but I'll tell you, this $1 is all the money in the world. They don't let you buy a car with that.
Well, there you go. You can have both with the Trinitarianism with Ellis.
Well, and I think that's part of what happens. But by virtue of language and by virtue of action, dualities emerge. Are you waving to people too, Jeff?
No, I'm just pointing out that it looks like Job's ready to talk.
I have fans too, Job. Pastor of the Discord. What are Jeff and I? Jeff's you're the reincarnation of C.S. Lewis.
I'm the Dave Rubin of the Discord. I'm the high in agreeableness, low in intelligence.
This frock was just foisted upon me. I did not ask for this. It did work, because yesterday I was supposed to receive somebody's confession, and so on the Discord, and I said, okay, well, your sins are forgiven, 3 cleaning your rooms and 1 bloody steak. And then they show a bloody steak in the photo album channel. Brilliant. That was Severian, I think. I actually didn't have anything to say, but you know what's so funny about this?
I saw your mic illuminated, and I just assumed that means you're ready to talk.
I was thinking of it, and then I was trying to figure out if I should. And
well, I think you should, Joe, because you're kind of you've always been a little bit of a, you're kind of like
A weirdo. I get it. Yeah. Okay.
No, the outlier, right? You weren't raised in church. You weren't doing it. So it's really, I am very interested in how all this strikes you and your thoughts about it. You know?
This stuff is so difficult. We had prayer week 2 weeks ago, and that meant that there were 5 nights where you could go to a church and there would be a half-hour service. But that means, so there was the Christian Reformed Church down the street, the Reformed Church where I go to, the little Catholic church that was started by Belgian refugees from World War I. That's where you can see where the border of my village is, because that's where they were allowed to build a Catholic church. Like they can have fun, but not where you get to see it. And so I finally had an excuse to go to that little Catholic church because I'd been curious about it. It's tiny, but it's lovely inside. Little thatch roof, statues, rosaries, and I don't know. I mean, I kind of miss that. But I've understood in my church there have been debates about the tiny wooden cross in the front of my church, which is not in the center of the other frame where it's to the left. It should be in the middle, but it's not. Pisses me off to no end. But that's probably also a very particular decision. So you notice that, like what you said, Paul, about the carpet color. And I've been taking part in this course on liturgy design, and like it's such a dance, and you have to know all the moves. And if you suddenly like, well, I like this dance better, you're gonna step on someone's feet, and they're gonna be unhappy with you. And like, we were doing this dance, and everybody knows this dance. Why do you want to do? See, now everybody's feet are hurting. And the only thing I can think of, because you were talking about marriage and about division, it's like, well, you need to confess to each other, and the other needs to be willing to take that confession. There's always going to be things you're going to disagree on, and what matters is whether that's important. Like, I am a huge, I worry too much about food. So, and I always do cooking at home, and that's I love doing that. So we have a nice division of labor, because my wife doesn't like to cook. She likes to eat what I cook. And so, for instance, I'll make her a nice egg, and in the pan, and I take care of it. It's all nice, and the balance is right, and just enough salt, just enough pepper. Like Peterson has this whole nice scene of how to really screw up an egg in a diner. It's like called Restaurant from Hell. If you haven't listened to it, go listen to it. It's brilliant. But anyway, I make sure it's a nice egg, and then I give the egg and coffee, because it's probably breakfast. And like, here you go, honey. You enjoy that. Here is my love for you embodied in this breakfast. And she puts ketchup on the egg. Like, you are American barbarian. And she's like, but I like it this way. I'm like, it's not supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be different. This is the liturgy. This is how you're supposed to enjoy that. This is
and you're
the
objectively
you're
right,
supposed to have.
Job.
Of course. But at some point, I figured that's the way she likes to enjoy her breakfast. I have my own thing. I love mayonnaise. I'm Dutch. I can't help it. She doesn't like mayonnaise. I could show you a jar of mayonnaise and a jar of ketchup. That's our marriage in an image, basically. And it's lovely, because I've learned to just enjoy that difference for what it is, because the surrounding story is still there. And so I can disagree with things in church, like, oh God, these diabetes-inducing songs about Jesus that I just really don't care for. But other people really love those. Like, okay, I'll just pretend I haven't heard them, and then you're happy with the song.
Yeah, Paul, you should write down diabetes.
I did. I got
songs.
it. Diabetes-inducing songs about Jesus. I got that there. That might
perfect.
be a title.
Oh no. But also, like, in the liturgy course, I was talking to a woman who's also going to be on the podcast, where she got tears in her eyes just telling me about how she feels about the Lord's Supper and how important that is to her. And we're all focusing on different things within that same building. And yeah, guys, it's gonna be a meaningless platitude no matter how I say it, but what's important is that we talk to each other about what we value in it. I don't know how else to frame it. I mean, and then you could say, yeah, but then at that point, why not just go back to the Catholic Church?
Or the Orthodox Church. That's
Yeah.
just it. I mean,
I don't have an answer. I mean,
So-
that's just
So can we take it this way? So then this is what I would say is like what I think has made people coalesce around you, Paul, in this little corner of the internet is that this was a place where people could say what they actually think.
Yeah.
They didn't find that in church.
Yeah.
Why didn't they find that in church?
well, other people have found it in church before. I mean, this isn't new.
But not as a rule. That's why we all exist.
Well, maybe you all hadn't found it in church, but you know, there's Quakers, and I mean, there's liberal churches, but even I mean, and there are things that you can say in our midst that will get you kicked out. And there are people. I mean, Jeff Quackenbush hasn't been around a while. I mean, he might feel insufficiently valued or slighted, or you know, I don't know if he'll listen to this, but you know, there's someone who doesn't want to. There's someone who sends me emails regularly about how he's not going to listen to any more of my videos because I let Carl talk in the comment section and because I talked to John Vervaeke. And, you know, it's people. They're going to do it. And so, you know, one of the things you learn quickly as a pastor is that that you can't, as the pastor cannot be the border between Christ and not Christ in the world. You can't be that, and you can't entertain that thought. And so when people get offended, they get offended, and you try not to take that personally, and you try, and when they express their offense to you as anger, you live with that too, and you try to love them and bless them. I mean,
that's interesting, Paul, that you saying a pastor cannot be the border between Christ and the rest of the world. There are plenty of churches that I've been in that say, no, Paul, that's exactly what a pastor is supposed to do.
Yeah.
So that's confusing too, to, you know, the layman like us, where it's just like, okay, I don't know what's going on.
And obviously I disagree with that pastor, but am I going to talk that pastor out of it? No, there's a long tradition of that. So
yeah.
The whole term of border just sounds kind of weird.
That's because you're in the Netherlands. In the EU. You have a Dutch Brexit, huh? That ain't gonna happen.
Aren't the borders in the Netherlands always moving out into the ocean too?
No, they're also going to Germany, which is where they need to be. I can't make jokes about this. No, I have just learned that when I'm going to be in your church, Paul, in the next couple of weeks, I've already told myself, like, don't make comments on the carpet, don't say anything about the carpet.
No, our church is
that's
far
a terrible
more
color,
laid
I'd
back
say,
than it used to be.
Who picked that color?
Oh,
yeah, they would welcome Sam in. There's like, Sam, you're fine as long as you like that purple carpet.
But even look at, I mean, you might have caught David Fuller's comment to Andrea about his visit to my church, and someone asked him very innocently, naively, "Are you a Christian?" And in America, that's just a, well,
they used code talk, Paul. Remember, they said, "Are you a believer?"
Right. And David was, didn't quite know how to. And, I look at an exchange like that because I know both sides a little bit. I mean, those were Dave's issues in there. And he grew up Methodist, and he's no longer a Methodist. And anyone who's, it doesn't matter if you grew up a Red Sox fan and you moved to New York and you sneak into Yankee games, you're going to have stuff about it.
Job doesn't get that reference, but that's okay.
No, but when I first went to visit my then girlfriend, now wife, in the US, she said, "I'll introduce you to some of my friends." One of her friends, for instance, was a Jehovah's Witness, who pointed to me, "Does he speak English?" No, we've written in hieroglyphs to each other for like years. Wonderful lady,
That's
know.
partially true, Job.
First impressions. Yeah, that is true. But she also took me to a friend of hers who she grew up with, and that's a black woman, and her mother came from Mississippi, like deep down Mississippi, and had moved to Michigan. And my wife had then made sure to tell me, whatever you do, Job, don't talk to her mother about religion. Like, okay, I won't. I didn't. She did. One of the first
you
questions
talked back.
Oh yes, one of the first questions out of her mouth was like, "So, Job, have you been saved?" I'm like, "No, I'm an atheist." And this was the first time in the US. I did not know what people thought when they heard the term atheist. To me, that's just a perfectly fine term to describe yourself. I mean, to me, it was the perfectly fine term, but to her, it was like, what? How can you not believe in the creator of this world? And like, this conversation's starting off well. So yeah, that reminded me of what you said about code talk. I was like, shit, what now I do? I'm at a reader somewhere else. Like, like deer in headlights. Like, well, yeah, I just, I was raised that way, but I don't really, I tried to damage control because I wasn't going to tell her what I really thought about religion, because of course, eventually I did, which wasn't a good idea, because, well, basically, as far as I'm concerned, God is a bloodthirsty tyrant. And well, that didn't go very well. No.
And he doesn't exist.
Well, yeah, but if he did,
Right.
then,
Right.
But I mean, that whole frame of how you, like, are you a believer? Are you a Christian? Yeah, that is have you been saved? I mean, as far as I didn't even know what that meant. Like, have I been saved?
There's some hymn about being washed in the blood that I'm thinking of right now.
It's Carrie,
Right.
What?
the movie, the Stephen King movie, Carrie.
Oh,
That was her baptism into Christianity.
Blood.
Carrie, that's what it's about, don't you know?
I thought it was a book of the Bible. It was based on a book of the Bible, right, Paul?
This conversation.
Poor Job. Just Google Carrie and blood in YouTube, and you'll get the idea.
I don't think I should. That doesn't sound like. Just Google these seemingly inconspicuous terms.
Make sure your safe for work filter is turned off.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But every culture has these language games. Every political culture, every family, it is endemic to humanity that their words have significance within context, and certain words have more significance than others. And
what's interesting is when you're the outsider, you recognize it, and when you're the insider, it is invisible to you.
So this is all Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris stuff. What is truth? What is belief? That was the conversation you had, Job, right? Do you believe in Jesus? What the hell does that mean? Like,
have you been saved?
Saved from what? I mean, I get that. And most of the time I've just got this contrarian. I'm not that low in agreeableness, but I'm a troll deep inside, and it's a bad thing to be as a pastor, because every now and then you just got to let it out and
show your true colors. Trolls.
And especially as a pastor, you can troll so well as a pastor, because the whole situation in some context has just set you up for it to just say the most trollish thing you can imagine. And
well, Paul, I'd like to welcome you to this free, open environment where you can, explore that part of yourself and share it with us.
Paul, that's something I'm actually very interested in and I mean, don't answer if you don't want to, but like, where have you changed in the last 2 years, confessionally and ideologically, that you don't talk about on your channel?
You have a filter that means you don't say some things in your channel. Violate it, please.
No, I mean, it's just,
We won't publish this.
Yeah, right.
it's more interesting because it's something I've done a lot of thinking about, and I quote you on, is like in our first conversation, you talked about confessionalism being a thin crust on the outside, which is true. So what that, and I think, and this is true in all these conversations we've had over the past 2 years, you know, are you a Christian? Do you believe in Jesus? But the reality is, and even in our conversations with someone like Sam, is all of these churches, no matter what they confess, are full of people. Like if you went through the early church beliefs around, say, the Trinity, something as central as the Trinity of Christianity, you're going to have like monophysitists, you're going to have diaphysitists, you're going to have Arians, you're going to have all these different people within the church. They just don't know it. So what does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to believe in Jesus? Because
if Jesus more than yourself,
which I think is a great definition, but what's
how
hard
can you
about,
tell if someone's a Christian? You can't. You get signs, but
right.
And then you have, again, the Jordan Peterson, Tom Holland dynamic, where someone from the Muslim world, I mean, when I read in Tom Holland's book about the fact that when Imperial Britain basically, you know, nudged the Muslim world to formally give up slavery, that was Christianization. I thought, yeah, there was a revelation for me. And I thought, that's a huge deal. Now will either side of the current culture war conversations say that, oh, horrible imperialism, Britain forcing the Muslims to give up formal slavery. How dare they? Nobody's going to make that argument. There it is. And so this is why I think the abiding Christian teaching is that there is one judge. And so then the skeptical position, there is no judge. I find that position deeply unsatisfying. Because we all do judge, we all can't help but judge. But
it makes it really hard to be mad at pedophiles.
Job, go ahead.
Unless they
No.
Hang
on. No. Luke just said something.
Well,
no,
and
I think that's
pedophiles are,
true.
So right now, there's so much. I mean, the internet, what does it bring to us? So John Ortberg, you know who John Ortberg is?
Yeah, isn't he Presbyterian?
Right. John Ortberg used to be the preaching pastor at Willow Creek. Of course, Willow Creek, Bill Hybels, the stuff about him. Just lately, Bill Ezekian, who was Bill Hybels' teacher at Wheaton and Trinity. He's been in hot water over things. John Ortberg is recently in trouble because someone came to him and revealed himself to be attracted to children, and John and said he hadn't acted on any of it, but John didn't make any moves apparently that formally kept this person from doing unsupervised ministry with children, which kind of really shocks me. But that's, as a pastor, in terms of understanding confession and confidentiality, is a very difficult thing. I mean, and in my church, there are times when I've had no let me just say this at first, I've had no knowledge of pedophiles in my tiny little church at all. No one has ever confessed that to me, so I'll put that out there. But there are times when I, as a pastor, will simply tell the council for looking at office bearers, I don't think that person probably should serve right now. And council will usually just take me at my word. Now, that's a tremendous amount of power, because if I decide I want to, I have a bias against somebody, but at the same time, as a pastor, things that you can't divulge. And so you just have to, in a small church, you can do this. But as churches scale, it gets very, very difficult. So John Ortberg is in some trouble now. John Ortberg has a child who is transitioning from one sex to another. And so, but it wasn't because of this, but because of the pedophile thing, John Ortberg was suspended from ministry in his church temporarily, at least. And it's just so, this stuff is so hard when it comes to real human lives. And the wisdom that we need and the decisions that we have to make are torturous, especially if you have any degree of responsibility, control, or power. So it's just hard. And that's our lot. What was the question?
Well, it was about no judge versus one judge. And what's interesting about all that and woven into everything that you were talking about there, Paul, that I was thinking about is that the one judge idea knows every single factor that goes into every decision and choice that any of us make. And so, Luke brought up the point, if there's no judge, it makes it really hard to deal with pedophiles. And the one judge knows everything that, went into what would cause someone to even have those tendencies, what factors led to somebody acting on it. Was it their own personal will and evil? Was it things that were built into them? What was it? And the one judge model accounts for all that. And the no judge model just kind of leaves you out in, the Wild West.
Right. Yeah. And also getting away with stuff. I mean, it's been so interesting. I mean, the many blessings of Donald Trump. And if anybody follows me on Twitter, or on Facebook, they have a certain degree of idea about how I feel about that man. But some of the blessings of Donald Trump is that I watch people who on Twitter and Facebook and out in the public media have been just posturing themselves as overwhelmingly open and agreeable, and they're never going to judge or condemn anyone, and hell is the last thing that would ever cross their mind. But once Donald Trump comes along, boy, they know who their enemy is, and they sure want him called to account and judged and held responsible and all of that. And odds are that in the way human history works, a man like Donald Trump is he going to, we don't even know what judgment means. I mean, what is just to do to, I'm not saying Donald Trump is a pedophile. I think Donald Trump's sexual tastes are pretty obvious to most of us by now. What do you do with a philanderer or a pedophile? What does justice look like? We have no idea. And so it's absolutely reasonable that our narratives throughout history have pushed this into an afterlife where some of the rules of the manifest image that we currently navigate don't hold. And, so I got into there's a guy in Sacramento, he's a therapist who had theological training, and you can find him on Twitter because I go back and forth with him. I hope that I should probably set up a coffee date sometime and build the relationship with him, because one of the things that you learn, Luke, in terms of your question, is that the more it's a lot easier to take cheap shots at a little two-dimensional face of someone talking on the internet than once you enter into a three-dimensional relationship with that person. And so whereas I can say probably straw mannish things against Sam Harris or other people on the internet, if I were to sit down with Sam Harris and have a meal and coffee, you would probably know because now I have all this video evidence on the internet that I'd softened against Sam Harris, because I'm not only high in openness, I like people. Right. And the number of people that I like, once I meet them, I just like them. It's just how I'm wired. And so and you know, some of the things I said about John Vervaeke before we started having real, you know, at least conversations like this, after I meet him, and I don't know if he's the hugging kind or not, but you know, and after we sit on stage, and you know, I'm going to like him more, and that's going to alter my commentary on his things, and I'm going to pull punches, and I'm going to be more generous, and I don't think those are bad things, but they're not necessarily completely good things either. So this all is just really, really complex. And
So
I used
that
to write Carl.
that reminded me of, was it Severian who made the 4 P's, 1-dimensional, 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, 4?
Yeah. No, it wasn't. Was it Severian? I can look it up. I put it on my blog. I thought it was great.
Yeah, but then what that makes me think of then is like, because you were just saying when you interact with somebody as a 2-dimensional or a 1-dimensional thing, rather than as a full being that you can hug and interact with and that you have to live with as a family. Well, that's what Sirach. There you go. That's what propositional is, right? It's 1-dimensional in his framing, and so that almost to me is like what you were basically talking about in a story, what we're talking about propositionally, which is that when you treat people as merely propositional, or just like a 1 or 2 dimension thing and not a real person that you have to love and hug and interact with, like in a family, like in a marriage, you're dealing with your idol of them, your projection of them, your static, lifeless image of them. You're not dealing with them as an icon. This is why I think
grief observed. That's what I hear. It's a grief observed right there.
Yeah, that's exactly. I think that's what Lewis was talking about. And so, and that's what leads to straw manning, judging, and then schism, because you're not treating a person as the infinity. The expression of the infinite is also infinite. You're not treating them as an infinitely complex being that has its ontology rooted in Trinitarianism. But that's what dealing with someone propositionally does.
But the most 4-dimensional relationship you have in your life, which is probably a spouse or a parent or a child or a partner, a spouse, you also, that the other scales as well, because there's no one that you can hate like your spouse. There's no one that can make you angry like your spouse. That works too.
Right. Everything is heightened.
Yeah.
Oh, but that's because at that point you expect the other to also have the 3D view of you that you have of them, which makes whatever they say more painful in that supposedly deeper understanding context. And I don't know, in my marriage, it's a thing I really try to do. Like, okay, she did something. She probably didn't do it to get the effect that, you know, how I need, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
Whatever she did was not supposed to piss me off. So the fact that I'm pissed off is probably my fault.
Mm-hmm.
And that's seriously, that stuff is important. It also
come on. In your marriage, you piss each other off intentionally too, I bet.
Wow. You know, that's possible. I should ask.
Sometimes it's unintentionally intentional in my experience. And so many thoughts flying around. There's a brilliant Lewis essay called "The Trouble with X" that I would recommend everybody look up and read, that ties into this. But there was also a conversation going on, I think, in the voice chat of the Discord last night, where there was some questions about good faith discussions. And I think good faith discussions, when you start to suspect that someone is not operating in good faith anymore, it's when these dynamics come into play, where it's just like, this person knows better. They're intentionally missing the point. I think more often than not, people are not intentionally missing the point. They are seeing what they're seeing, and it infuriates us that they can't see it the way that we're seeing it. And
Well, it's
sometimes,
kind of a both and, right? Like part
yeah,
of them is probably seeing it correctly,
yeah. But
and part of
how
them
much,
isn't.
and how much am I aware when I'm partially seeing it and I'm
Yeah.
not, right? How much of me is just being stubborn and not wanting to see what it is that somewhere in the recess of my consciousness I know that I see, but what am I going to have to give up? What ground am I going to give up to them? And then are they just going to completely discount my perspective if I do? That's
And
so much of what I go through in my disagreements and arguments that I get in with my wife.
this
Yeah.
is where Christianity is incredible, and all these esoteric philosophical conversations, like this is what I say to my wife, are incredibly practical, because what you just said, good faith conversations, and we have this duality of there's certain things we see but we're maybe repressing. It's kind of elephant rider, it's kind of iceberg. There's stuff that we're maybe seeing that we're not seeing, and we're acting in certain ways. The Christian ethic is self-sacrifice, right? So in a conversation where you're trying to be, so whatever, I mean, maybe Carl will see this. Carl, it was all public anyhow, it was on the conversation. In all the comments on me and Karen's conversation, Carl made a bunch of comments the other day that really felt like bad faith. It felt like he wasn't trying to understand me. And so I've been talking to people, because really, like, I'm such a ridiculously emotional person that, like, it really affected me. Like, it sent my whole day into a tailspin, kind of. There were other extraneous factors, but it affected me a lot. Because I'm always just, whenever someone is mad at me, I'm like, you just must not understand.
How can you not love me?
Well, I mean, I understand how you could not love me too. But I'm okay. But
It's the trials of a trophy husband.
It'll be Luke's channel.
Yeah, a trophy husband. Yeah. But then, so then I'm trying to figure out, like, I'm having all these thoughts, right, of self-sacrifice, racking my brain, just not scapegoating and demonizing others. Well, just like, wow, whatever, you know. So I'm just like, how can I think this should always be the Christian's thought, is how can I be Christ to the world in this circumstance? Like, how do I act Christianly in the circumstance? How do I sacrifice myself? Maybe he has bad faith, maybe not. Maybe it's just a temperament thing. And because I really think it's a good assumption to think everyone has well intended. Everybody gets that, came up in the Discord last night, of like judging intentions, and I'm just like, who cares? It's deeper than that. We just say this all the time. The road to hell is paved with them, right? So stop analyzing intentions. You know, I do think that Carl is driven by a love of the truth. But then it's just like, it really feels like you're not trying to see something that maybe you're not seeing that I could be saying. So then I'm like, how do I engage? What is my response then as a Christian? How do I engage that? I really felt like I was at a impasse. I just didn't know. I was like, I feel like no matter what I say in this format or in this context, it's not going to work.
Which Peterson rule is it? Assume that someone knows
Rule
something
9.
you don't. Whatever number that is.
9. Rule 9.
Yeah.
Nine.
I'm just thinking this
German rule.
Even in what you think, and this is impossible to do. I'm just throwing it out there theoretically. I shouldn't say it's impossible. I know for me it's very difficult to do this in the moment. But if I could ever seize on this idea of presume, not even presume, just be convinced, especially when your spider sense is going off and you're saying, this is in bad faith, say, there is truth in what this person is saying. I need to dig in and find it and agree with that person on the truth that I can find.
Right.
And if you do nothing else and you just do that, they may be 99% wrong, but there's at least 1% of truth in what that person is saying. And if you can find that, that's a way, in my experience, that's been a way to build a bridge.
Right. And it doesn't matter as a Christian, right? even if they're in bad faith. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Okay,
Everybody with
but
Jesus was bad faith.
in the whole acting like Christ self-sacrifice thing, there is as far as I'm concerned, a real risk in self-sacrificing and by self-sacrificing smothering. And that's
Elaborate.
Oh yeah, let's
well, wait a sec for Paul to come back.
I'm gonna pause. So we're off air right now.
Oh, okay. I'm still recording.
Oh no!
No.
See, that's why something is recording.
Paul could go back and he can listen to all our personal stories that we were talking about.
Yeah.
So do I have to edit this? Do I have to edit?
We will have
definitely. That was some
we were talking about personal stuff.
I used my wife's name, and I'm not supposed to use that on YouTube.
All right, I will cut it out.
I basically destroyed my own marriage in 5 minutes, so we got to cut this.
But I'm gonna keep it.
Okay, but there is one judge, and he will not be happy about that.
That's true. That is true.
All right, I'm going to start recording again. I don't know how this affects it. Do I get a separate copy? I'm not sure what's going on.
It's gonna just
just unpause the recording and it'll just continue. It worked perfectly. I've paused and unpaused many. I'm
unpausing now, and Job, you said something about self-sacrifice when I had mentioned that there's at least 1% truth in what somebody's saying.
Smothering, yeah.
Well, you could be Christ-like, but then you can also not allow someone to grow by always kind of, I don't know, you're always, you're curling the floor in front of them. They don't get to stumble.
You're enabling.
Because you're always sacrificing. And I don't know, but that might just be a dumb remark on my side. Maybe that's just the way this is.
Ooh, can we be codependent with Jesus?
Oh yeah. Well, not from his side, but from our side, absolutely. As pastors, you see it all the time.
Why? I mean, he says, go pick up your cross.
Yeah. And he also says, ask anything and it'll be given.
Including the cross.
People don't do a lot of asking
Jesus,
for that.
can I have a cross, please?
Well, there's also the be careful.
You already have one. Yeah.
There's the be careful what you wish for, right? You'll ask for what you want and you'll get it, but it'll come in a way that you weren't expecting sometimes.
Lord, can I have humility and patience?
Ask for those things. Well, the good, Job, I don't know if you've seen, is the good place in the Netherlands?
Yes, it is. The Netherlands has that name. It is pretty much that. Yeah, it's also known as the Low Countries, but also
But that's part of the. I want to be careful with spoilers because I'm trying to hold back on spoilers for a while in that little series. But that's part of what the show deals with. That self-improvement for most of us requires difficulty, and you see that all the time with codependent relationships. That they're desperately trying to make life better for their children, which all of us as parents want to do. And so figuring out, having the discernment to figure out when to remove an obstacle or when to, you're just watching them and they're going to hit it. And it's like, okay. And you just sit and watch. And then sometimes people will come back and say, you saw that coming. Yeah, I did. Well, why didn't you stop me? Well, sometimes you actually did try to stop them and they didn't listen, or you just what conversation was it? Oh, it was with Guy about advice giving. People don't work that way. Oh, if you tell me all of the pitfalls, I will avoid them. Yeah, right. Maybe if you're already fairly wise and open and actually have a degree of control over yourself, but most of us don't. And so
Sam Harris, if we could just all be rational and just do all these obviously reasoned things.
I would like to take a liberty for just a second, if you guys will indulge me, just read the first 2 paragraphs of that Trouble with X episode, because I think it ties to Trouble with X essay, because
I can't hear Jeff.
So he says, I suppose I may assume that 7 out of 10 who read these lines are in some kind of difficulty about some other human being, either at work or at home, either the people who employ you or those whom you employ, either those who share your house or those whose house you share, either your in-laws or parents or children, your wife or your husband, are making life harder for you than it need be, even in these days. It is to be hoped that we do not often mention these difficulties, especially the domestic ones, to outsiders. But sometimes we do. An outside friend asks us why we are so glum, and the truth comes out. On such occasions, the outside friend usually says, "But why don't you tell them? Why don't you go to your wife or husband or father or daughter or boss or landlady or lodger and have it all out?" People are usually reasonable. All you've got to do is make them see things in the right light. Explain to them in a reasonable, quiet, friendly way. And we, whatever we say outwardly, think sadly to ourselves, "He doesn't know X." We do. We know how utterly hopeless it is to see X, or how utterly hopeless it is to make X see reason. Either we've tried it over and over again, tried it till we are sick of trying it, or else we've never tried it because we saw from the beginning how useless it would be. We know that if we attempt to have it all out with X, there will either be a scene, or else X will stare at us in blank amazement and say, "I don't know what on earth you're talking about." Or else, which is perhaps worst of all, X will quite agree with us and promise to turn over a new leaf and put everything on a new footing. And then 24 hours later will be exactly the same as X has always been.
And once you started reading, I remember that essay so well. My favorite biography of Lewis is The Narnian, because I think more than any of the other biographies, Lewis could be terribly private. He A Grief Observed was basically a life obscured. But Alan Jacobson, The Narnian, goes into, what was his relationship with Mrs. Moore, and we've got enough circumstantial evidence to imagine that he's living with this crazy woman who he likely had a romantic and sexual relationship with, if possibly with Lewis's own kink. But then he, after becoming a Christian, lives, serving her in a very cruciform way. But even, see, part of the crazy thing about Christianity is that you can tell yourself you're doing something in a cruciform way for X, and at the same time, it's just all codependence, and you don't have the courage to negotiate. So you got to take the Jordan Peterson stuff also in there, that people, and it's us. I mean, and so I was actually, my wife had said something to me a couple days ago that kind of set me off, and again, nobody can set someone off like their spouse, because spouse is just way too much territory that you're all contact with. And I had many good reasons why she should not say, do, or think as she does. But it began to dawn on me that there wasn't just a little bit of something wrong in me that was contributing to my pissiness about this interchange. And whatever's on her side of the line is on her side of the line. But always recognizing that there's something on my side of the line. I can't do a lot about what's on her side of the line, but I should be able to do more. I'm more responsible for what's on my side of the line. And so it's just, so there you do it. There you do the Christian mortification and the confession and the and the examination. And that's part of the reason I really love Lewis, because that aspect of the Christian life is such a huge percentage of it. If the problem with X, the percentage of people who come to me and that's what they want to talk about with me is what, 80%, 90%? That's us. That's humanity. That's why I love The Great Divorce, because the scene on the bus at the beginning of the book,
I got the same thing, man. Like, I've done this meetup 2 times now. And the first time I was already prepared. I had all my philosophical notes, and all we talked about was kids and meaning and Viktor Frankl and so the second one, okay, we had our subjects. We're going to talk about evil. So I had all my is evil universal or particular? And I had the ring of Gyges, and what if somebody is psychotic, and responsibility and evil, all prepared. 3 people showed up, so there were 5 of us, and we just talked. We didn't even talk about evil. We talked about truth, about how to be a good businessman, how to train people to actually elevate them instead of just having them work for you. That's what people want to talk about. We didn't even talk about anything so philosophical. And as soon as I brought up, the problems with objective morality, people were like, yeah, no, that's kind of too difficult. Let's talk about this instead. And next time, I'm just not even going to bring notes. It's clearly pointless. And here I was being oh no, they're going to ask me difficult questions about philosophy. I'd better be able to answer them. No, that's not on people's minds. So that's exactly what you're saying, Paul. People come to you and say, I want to talk about this. You sure you don't want to talk about Wittgenstein? No.
But that's what's so great. I don't know. Obviously, I like philosophical conversations almost as much as anyone. But and Paul, you bring this up on your channel a lot, and I think we all find this true, is that most often the most meaningful and transformative conversations are the personal ones, are the ones where and I was going to say, Job, even in all of that, when you're talking about kids, you're talking about philosophy. You're talking about all this really deep stuff at the same time. You're just not using, esoteric, $10,000 words to do it. And it scales because everybody can talk about that. Most often, I don't know, I said something on the Discord the other day, and I think it's true. I really do, is that a propensity toward intellectualizing things, or even high intellect or high IQ, I would argue, I don't know, I almost feel like it's often, and maybe more often, a hindrance to genuine faith than a help.
Could be. Whatever, if we can define genuine faith.
Well, I think it just distracts us. It's really easy for us to start using ideas as a heuristic. And then you just say, well, I'm just playing this game of figuring everything out conceptually.
Right.
Well, that's difficult, Luke, because I get that retort sometimes on the Discord. Perfectly fine, valid by, people I respect say, well, you're trying to figure all these things out. You're trying to, do it all philosophically. But, maybe it's not what you should be focusing on, if I understand that comments correctly. But also, you can't just take things at face value. You got to think about them. You can't just, oh yeah, sure.
Right.
I mean, with some things, yeah, I have no good examples.
But it's also a function of certain people.
Yep.
And in terms of my channel, well, that's a high degree of the people who have come here. you know, we're all kind of bound up in our heads, and we have to think things through, and it's just part of what we have to do. Other people need to knit. Other people need to go chop wood. It's and
But at
the
some
point,
yeah. Well, I mean, it is true that at least I've come to this realization for myself, is that at some point, nobody gives a shit. Like, I can read this book about Kant and say, oh, that was really useful. Nothing matters. It's like before you were enlightened, you chop wood and you carry water, and afterwards you chop wood and you carry water. You keep doing the same thing. You know, like I actually had a weird thing this morning where I often have thoughts when I'm taking a shower, and you know, it's when I've figured many things out that later on the Discord I kind of work out. So, you know, I was thinking about things and I got this strong idea of like, whatever, you're a Christian, just act like it. Okay, fine. And that's just been kind of sitting in my head the rest of the day, like, well, maybe that's the whole idea. Doesn't mean I can't read the book, fine, but it's kind of not, it's not the focus of it. It's just, yeah, you can read the book on the side and you can talk with your nerdy friends on the Discord. You go do that. But what still matters is that, okay, you know, having conversations with you folks, going to church tomorrow, doing the podcast. There's probably a fancy Vervaeke word for what I'm describing.
Agave.
Watch out, Paul. Oh.
There probably is.
There probably is. Yeah. I don't know. That was just kind of sitting in my head, so I had to talk about that sometime. I got nothing new otherwise.
There's something that links up for me to what you've called genuine faith, Luke. And Paul, I think you alluded to a little bit of where the ideas connect for me with your definition of what a Christian is, somebody who trusts Jesus more than they trust themselves. It has to do with, you know, where Luke, you had said the higher the intellect, maybe the more difficult it is to reach genuine faith. Something I thought about is the more control I have, the more direct control I have over something, the more I'm going to rely on myself, the more I'm going to trust myself. So if I have direct control over figuring out a situation because I have a higher intellectual capacity or ability to problem solve, I'm not even going to think of relying on trusting in, to use the frame that you presented, Paul, trusting in Jesus. I'm going to trust in Jeff. I'm going to trust in my problem solving. I'm going to trust in my money to be able to deal with the problem of, you know, the leaky pipe that needs to be fixed, and the plumber's going to charge me, you know, $1,000 or however much they're going to charge. Well, I'm just going to rely on my money. I'm going to rely on my resources. It's when I run out of the ability to address the problem myself that I have to fall on my knees. I cannot do this. I am finally at my end, and there's nothing that I can do to fix this problem.
Well, that reminds me of what you said, I think, with Guy, Paul. I believe that you were talking about, and I quoted it in the comments, but like you're beginning to think that a lot of the meaning crisis stems from our affluence and something else, because that's essentially exactly tied to what you're saying, Jeff, is because we're affluent, we think we have control over all these things, and so we don't need trust. But then ironically, and this is where all these spiritual things and material things come together, you know, and where heaven meets earth is, you could say, you know, the Bible is, don't store up for yourselves where moth and rust destroy, but store up for yourselves in heaven. Well, that's not just some like nonsense abstraction. It's really real and practical. So it's what they're essentially saying is don't trust in your bank account to fix your pipes. You know, like if you have a plumbing issue, because that's not where your faith is. It's like that could go away in an instant. That's the thing that we don't. This is why I love that George MacDonald quote so much from Lilith, is that no man understands anything. And when he gets that, that's his first tottering step, not toward understanding, but toward the capacity for one day understanding. Because we don't really understand how the world works. We think, oh, I have money so I have a good job, I have money coming in, I have this paycheck, I have this house, I have this stuff, I can pay off that bill, it could all disappear. It could all disappear in a second, and God in his mercy may do that to you to show you you've built your house on sand.
What's that parable?
You're gonna tell that story to me, to me, someone with my first name. Yeah.
Right. I mean, yeah.
It reminds me of that parable, Paul. I just recently saw it, but I can't remember where it was. I'm hoping that you'll know it very well, which is the man that Jesus talks about who had like an abundant crop, and his barn was too small to hold it all. I'll build a big barn.
Yeah.
I have enough to live on for the rest of my life. I'm just gonna live it up. And then how does it go?
God, tonight you're basically, God comes to him and says, I'm calling in the loan, which is your life. I'm doing it tonight. And, what happens then to your plans, little man? And yeah, the parable of the barn builder.
Yeah.
Great parable.
And
it's so true.
It can all just go away. I mean, I've been thinking about, I've been researching investing, and Luke and I have talked about this before, where it's just like, what if I am blessed with surplus funds beyond what I need to live on? Well, what is the best thing to do with it? Should I store it up to try to make sure that I'm not a burden for anybody else in the future, and invest it in such a way where I'll have X amount of dollars in the bank because I know I'm going to need to continue eating when I can't work anymore and I can't produce an income? Or, should I release that money into the world for making a difference, making more good happen in the world right now, and not put my faith in the money to take care of me in the future, but to just kind of let it go? One seems very reasonable by a certain standard, and the other seems completely unreasonable. Yeah. And it just depends on what your perspective is on which is the unreasonable version and which is the reasonable version.
Is that the right term, or is it which one brings the kingdom?
That's code talk.
Well, no, I agree.
No, it is not code talk. I disagree with that. I don't think that's code talk. I think that's very real.
Code talk isn't unreal. It's just of a certain language.
Yeah, that's
okay.
I should say that's insider talk, Job. You'll have to explain what that
Job,
is.
I get what you're saying, but I think what Jeff is saying is that you could, from a Christian perspective, talk yourself into either way of living and deciding and justify them and rationalize them both as kingdom.
I'll tell you a story that I heard in seminary years ago, and how much of seminary haven't I forgotten, but you never forget the illustrations. There was I'm not going to name him, but there was a fairly prominent Reformed theologian who did not believe he should store up treasure on earth for retirement. And this guy is published. He's not A-level, but anybody who's got too much, who's got a little bit of Reformed education would probably recognize his name. He published some important books. So he opted out of Social Security. He denied a pension. He saved no money. And this man, because he was well known, when in fact he was elderly and could no longer write books or teach seminary or any of these things, still had to eat. And so his church, his community, because his name was known fairly broadly, people put out word, and a whole bunch of people went through a whole lot of work to make sure that this guy would not die of starvation once he could no longer draw an income. And they took care of him. Well, okay. What's our perspective on that story? Was he irresponsible in sloughing off his due diligence in caring for his retirement years? Or did, God simply provide as he always imagined God would?
I don't know. I mean, this is really difficult. Like friends of mine, and they're not even friends. They're people I met once, and they live in America, and they're friends of us on Twitter, basically. Their little girl has cancer, has had it for a long time, and is now like, that girl has wanted to die. You know, she said that to her parents because the suffering is so terrible.
Yeah.
The cancer is in her spine. It's just torturous. They can't operate because the cancer's in her spine. So they're going into like the last months maybe of this long process, and they're saying, well, you know, if you can help, we'd appreciate it. And that's when I think, okay, yeah, that's how, what can I do? So I send money. But then, of course, the next question is, well, am I doing enough? How much should I send? Should I even be sending? Could I not give this money to somebody who is closer to me? Yeah, but closer in what way? In my village, in my family? Where's that border again? Where's that barrier? I don't know. And then that doesn't mean that, yeah, I could also maybe, if I invest that money, you know, I could do something even greater with it if I had more because I had that profit. And then I kind of get into, then I feel like I'm in the same domain as when I'm reading all the philosophy books, like I'm thinking about this too much, and instead I just send money. And then, well, maybe I made the wrong decision, or for as much as that decision even exists, like, well, the fact is they had money that they didn't have, and I had money that I could spend. I mean, that's so difficult when I don't have an answer, and maybe there isn't. Well, of course there is one, but I don't even know if I'd be when. Yeah, I got nothing.
So I don't know, my idea about this, and I don't know if it's right, but this is where I am right now. And in my understanding of Theosis, and this ties into Jordan Peterson, is I think when you follow, it's rule 7, I believe, which is tell the truth or at least don't lie. And you couple into that with Dostoevsky's like, don't lie, especially to yourself. I think part of what, at least in the Orthodox understanding of theosis or sanctification, is that you purify your eye or your vision. So like when Jesus said the eye is the lamp of the body, and if your eye is well, your whole body will be full of light, but if your eye is evil, your whole body will be full of darkness. And Paul, you brought this up the other day, and it's something I've thought a lot about over the past few years, but another way you could translate evil is divided. Or James, the brother of Christ, talks about, St. James talks about the double-minded man, unstable in all he does, who's tossed to and fro by the waves of life. I think this is why I love Jordan Peterson so much, is I think when you tell the truth, I think in as much as it's possible, if we were truth-telling, especially with ourselves, all of I don't know what it means about hard decisions, but I think a lot of our waffling of indecisiveness and not knowing and questioning would go away so much, because I think you purify your vision to such a point that it's not that you don't have disagreements with maybe other people or you see the world differently, but I think it's coupled with that passage in 1 Corinthians, which says, or no, it's in Romans, where it's, you know, this man thinks one day is holier than the other, and this man thinks Sunday is the appropriate day. Each man should be fully convinced in his own mind. I think if you can stop lying, I think your conscience and your noetic knowledge, your nous, the center of your being, becomes purified, and you see with a vision which may not be the same for everyone else, but I think you can live into it with confidence. And so like a decision like that, I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's a right or a wrong thing. I don't think you can figure it out that way. You know what I mean? Like, what should I do? I think it's more of like an inward, intuitive, truth-telling thing, because there are many right decisions. There's an infinite, I mean, this is the whole problem again, right? There's an infinite amount of things you could do with your surplus of money. It's infinite. but I think our call is to be Christ to the world in our particular circumstances. And I really do believe there's, I don't know, there's a line from Loris toward the end of the book, Loris. God, that book's so good. That said and I'm not going to remember it as well as he wrote it, but it was something like, at the end of his life, this character said something like, he saw and he realized at the end of his life that there really only was one path. Because Loris plays with time, and he's thinking about these decisions from his youth, and he's thinking about all these different iterations of, he has all these different names throughout the book and all these different people that he was, and at the end he's looking back to the fire like his youth, and earlier on in the book he was looking into a fire and seeing himself in the future. Loris is one of these trippy books, and he was saying at the end he started to see like there only ever was one path for me. And I think part of that is the purification of your, I don't know if any of that makes sense.
That theme Luke is really focused on in that movie, A Hidden Life, right?
Yeah. I think that's what that movie's about.
I don't know if either of you have seen that movie yet. Are you familiar with what that movie is?
No, I'm keeping myself from it until I can see it.
Yeah. So we won't go into too many spoilers then, or any really.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it's what I was saying.
We're also 2 hours in, and it's about time for me to go make dinner.
Ooh,
Eggs?
What's on the eggs?
You bastard. No, it's keto pizza.
Ooh,
Lovely.
that looked, the picture you post on the Discord looked delicious.
So think about it. The crust is made out of cheese with some almond flour, egg, and cream cheese. That's just the crust.
Wow.
Then you add on that more cheese, meat, and some vegetables and some tomato sauce. You gotta lie down after that. It's just
dense.
Dessert.
Reminds me of a Weird Al song.
What one is that?
Go on.
The Complicated song.
I don't know that one.
nah.
Put it in the notes.
I'll put it in the notes.
That'll probably be most people's favorite thing of this conversation.
Yeah, this went all over the place, but we could
Such a
probably be going on
surprise.
for a while. Yeah. All right, we can stop recording and I'll tell you all what I really think.
Well, I'm glad everybody was able to coordinate, get together. This is good. I enjoy it.
Oh, I enjoyed it too. Thank you so much. It is so much fun. I in all fairness, I on a very regular basis, I put the two convo limit on, which spawned a lot of things, and so I don't have any regrets about doing that, but I so do want to swing back and just follow up and have more conversations, and it's a time. This is why, again, I can't get rid of my desire for the freedom from time and decay, because I could talk all morning with you guys, and I don't know if anybody'd care to watch it, but I would enjoy it. But then how, and that just scales all over my life. So
You're just too popular, Paul. You got to start being less likable, and fewer people want to talk to you.
I didn't used to have this problem.
Well, you're also too interested in too many things and too many people.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
Someone in the comments section upbraided me for yes. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. It says, you've used that word how many times in this video? I'm saying you should not use this word again. I thought, yeah, he's probably right, but that's interesting too. It just doesn't.
Yeah, there's a lot of fillers that I noticed that all the people in this community use, which will be like, it's complicated, or that's interesting. Right. Or we'll say, and all the things, and the stuff, and the things.
Yeah. Always wrestling with that which we cannot get our hands around, grasp. So, yeah, very true.
That's interesting.
Well, Job's getting hungry. We got to let him go, and Luke's got to go, and
yeah.
I've got to go. So,
All right. Well, thank you all. I will edit out the middle of the conversation, and I will post it probably sometime next week. So,
All right.
all right. It's good seeing you
Bye,
all.
everybody.
Wonderful.
Have a good day, morning, evening, night.